Hi, Elana.
How are you?
You know, could have been better, but
Where are you now? You're here in Israel or you're
yeah, we're in Israel. I mean, we were supposed to be right now in a big lecture for the JCCs in the States, in the West Coast,
Mhm.
but we have obviously rescheduled everything. So we are just busy, like, you know, 24/7 with interviews to foreign media, English and Arabic, and doing briefings. So we are busy from morning to night.
So I'm gonna just ask you straight out. I mean, we're being battered in the media, we're being battered in the streets. The public is, while you have the public support for Israel to a certain extent, and it's wonderful to see, it's not really all that we're seeing, and it's certainly not the loudest voice out there. So sometimes we wonder if all of these webinars and analyses are they making a difference? And if so, what? The Security General of the United Nations comes out and says, oh, well, Israel's basically to blame for our own massacre. So I don't know. Are they making a difference, Avi? Are you feeling like you're able to make change?
Yes, definitely. I'll tell you why. And particularly when we're talking about American jury. For example, I had a big briefing for the Friends of the IDF audiences. And there is a desperate need of really understanding and real education so people could then confront the voices, as you said, of those who are actually trying to flip it all over. This is our job. So, for example, when I'm saying to people the Hamas-Iran connection, when I'm giving it in the right context, in the wide context, when I'm providing the nuanced understanding, when I'm talking about why is it accurate to say that Hamas is ISIS, and I bring people of notes or things that people can use in echoing that. These are all educational tools because in the end of the day, it's all about the ability to provide supporters of Israel with intelligent, profound arguments that are not staying in the land of the narratives. Because I always said, look, we are losing this ground of narratives. We have no chance. I see that happening in front of our eyes, Now the whole thing is about poor Gaza, the poor people, the poor babies, the poor water, the poor whatever. And so providing the people with the education and providing them with the ammunition, if you wish, educational ammunition, to be able to go out and to explain and to echo and to expand this network of understanding, this is our small little contribution.
We have to realize that we give to them that intellectual empowerment, so to speak, but then we're limited on who's willing, who's capable of going out and doing it out there. There's a lot of criticism that Israel's Hasbara is insufficient. And I'm a big believer that maybe we need to stop just blaming Israel's Hasbara and realize that in all of our Hasbara efforts are not being received and utilized well by the diaspora. So individuals like yourself who have this, knowledge and understanding, trying to transmit that understanding is great, but the recipient of that understanding doesn't necessarily feel confident and capable to go and regurgitate the information that you might have given them. And I think that leaves us at a point where we're doing so much on behalf of Israel from the side of Israel, but out there in the world, the echo is very small in its impact. People feel incapacitated. They feel silenced. They feel that they're worried of what kind of accusatory questions are going to come back at them if they do try to say anything. How are you encouraging people to move past their own inhibitions in speaking louder and doing more?
My logic basically says if you are talking to 10 people, and by doing that, you have 2 people or 3 people that are able to go out and do something, in my logic, it says it's better than not doing anything at all.
Absolutely.
And I think that American juries simply have to move to a mode of we are now in a battle in the United States.
I think that probably the people who bring you in, those are audiences who they're ready to hear it. Maybe they're ready to take action. But do you think that is able to have a wider impact?
Yes,
That we're able to reach now because of the extremity of what's happened? We're able to reach people who previously were unwilling to hear the truth of Israel. They hear it as narrative, they hear it as bias. But now, are you hearing that people are more willing who weren't previously to see, wait a second, maybe we've been blinded by propaganda or brainwashed by their new form of Jew hatred?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not only saying to American Jewry, you have to change the paradigm, you have to change the diskette, you have to understand that you are in a battle. I'm also basically saying to them, here is one target that you need to target. Here is a target. I put a mark on this target. This is what you have to fight. And this is something that I've been saying all along all those years. It obviously was accurate. Unfortunately, it was falling on a deaf ear. One of the things that fuels this whole toxic environment is the utterly failure of education in the United States. And the fact that the colleges and the students and the universities, it's not by mistake or a chance that in those centers we see a major fuelers of this toxic outlook. And why is that? Because education was slaughtered.
It's like the students at Stanford University who, when they were told by the professor, who's a Jew, stand up and go to the back of the room, they did it. And I'm trying to wrap my mind around what Jew today stands up and goes to the back of the room. Nobody was holding a gun to their head. Nobody even threatened violence, but they got up. Yes, this one professor is fired, but that's one incident amongst probably many that are taking place. And there's also an issue of the silencing of the Jew. And let's not only address campuses, there's also the problem of what's happening in high schools. I mean, we know that post 9/11, there was an influx of funding into education coming from anti-Israel elements. So now anti-Israelism and anti-Semitism in that form has just infiltrated every possible educational arena, even for the diversity training and bias training. All of them actually possess anti-Israel and anti-Semitic bias within them. And so it's really become the point where we are all complicit in how the educational system has been really, caged in, and all under the auspices of this is social justice. Fighting the Jew is the way, and fighting Israel is the way to achieve the social justice we all want to see, the peace we want to see in the world. Eliminate the Jew, and you'll, bring world peace. And we see it now more and more. Standing up for Israel, regardless of your personal politics, is something every family must talk about. How do you address that? Does that happen in your community, in your discussions? Or are you feeling that maybe now they're finally waking up to it?
Look, one of the things that I've been saying all along, what do I mean by the slaughtering of educators? We saw an upside-down reality where people that are coming from the heart of the educational system, professors and staff, people that have no professional knowledge, they don't master the languages of the Middle East. You got professors for Chinese literature, social workers, and all kinds of people. And basically for them, bashing and criticizing Israel became a great source of positioning themselves as moral beacons. Mm-hmm. Regardless of the fact that they have no knowledge, regardless of the fact that they don't provide any understanding other than slogans and narratives and hollow slogans and hollow narratives. So you got a situation where an average professor is going to the next Starbucks and having his latte, and he writes this article about the poor Palestinians, Israel is occupying, humanitarian crisis, and the whole story is now abducted and subjected to a narrative-based and emotional, touchy-feeling stories. You don't have to provide context. You don't have to provide credentials. You don't have to provide nuanced understanding. You don't have to show what exactly is the sources of your knowledge, what exactly makes you an expert on the Middle East if you are teaching Chinese literature. None of those questions was made. All of them are very legitimate questions, because I'm always giving the example of like, well, my tooth really bothers me. Maybe I should go to my lawyer. You don't go to your lawyer if your tooth bothers you. You go to your dentist. the unfortunate issue is that because American Jews are such a part of this whole narrative-based discussion, touchy-feeling, tikkun olam, all those things, American Jews was basically kidnapped from within. And you got a situation where American Jews basically became paralyzed, unable to do anything with that, because if they will dare to ask the Chinese professor of American literature, what exactly makes you an expert in the Middle East, they will be crucified for being suffocating freedom of speech and academic freedom. And I've been saying for years, excuse me, I'm not suffocating anyone's voice. I'm asking legitimate questions.
Right.
You are positioning yourself as source of knowledge, as a moral beacon. I want to understand, what are your credentials? What gives you that? This is how education was butchered. It's not education, it's a show. It's a Broadway show. It's a Hollywood stage. Narratives that sound wonderful, and nice slogans, and sound bites, and kumbaya, and all those nice things. But it has nothing to do with education. It has nothing to do with critical thinking. It has nothing to do with understanding of complex world. And in order to do tikkun olam, you have to understand the olam first. You don't understand olam because a fakakte Chinese professor tells you nice narrative. That doesn't make you understand the world. It's only make you blindsided and unable to understand it. Because when you butcher education, you butcher human constructive dialogue. Because the building blocks that human constructive dialogue is based upon must include context, chronology of events, sequence of events, facts. They were all butchered.
Because the facts became so distorted, even in the Jewish educational systems, they were reaching a point where they were not going to just teach Israel's history. They had to teach a side by side, the Israel side, Israel's narrative, and the Palestinian narrative. And that kind of equation, moral equivalency between those who seek our destruction and those who continuously pursue peace, that is also slaughtered education from within. Now the question becomes, is it salvageable? As an American Jew, grown up in the American Jewish education system, my own high school became very dominated by the progressive narrative. And again, also, Avi, it may not necessarily only be American Jewry, but they are the largest Jewish population in the world. So much of our attention is on them. And it creates an impossible scenario that there's almost no answers.
Look, when I was talking about how American Jewry and Tikkun Olam was distorted from within, and I was presenting it in different forums. Are you familiar with the bituya Simon Nafal?
Good. Very difficult to translate because people don't know what an asimon was anymore.
Exactly.
But yes, they get it. They grasp it finally. So basically, it takes a bunch of brutally massacred Jews.
Yeah,
it needs to be that. It needs to be that in order for the asimon to fall.
I'll give you an example so you can understand how distorted the whole situation became. Good friends of ours who are familiar with our work actually said, why are you not at Hillel? They contact people and say, look, we are giving you $100,000. Avi will go to chapters of Hillel. He's well known. He has a lot of credentials. He's not a spokesperson. He's a professional Middle East expert. The knowledge that he's bringing is very valuable. Let's do that. We give you $100,000. You don't have to pay anything. Do you think something came up with that?
No.
Nada. Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. This is the level of the distortion.
Anything that's pro-Israel has become an obstacle to even Jewish unity. You have Hillel, Chabad, Students Supporting Israel, Stand With Us, Mosaic, Olami, Maccabee Task Force. Is the budget now about $612 million being donated to universities? And most of them will only have this particular kind of programming, but they won't have what you have suggested as a very essential element, the raising of the intellectual understanding and the facts by people. It's really probably, Avi, out of fear. They don't want to give that ammunition because they also don't want to have to deal with the counter of, will they also get the budget from the universities and the other funders who are progressive, and their $300,000 tops your $100,000. So you know what? We're going to stick with that narrative. I don't know. I don't know if there's any right answer here. I know that I faced it when I was at Boston University and running Israel education and a Holocaust education on the campus for 5 years. It was one battle after another of just trying to get programming. That was 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
I don't know if the universities are a lost cause. I'm worried right now about high school students, frankly, and the intellectual ammunition you give maybe is above their ability to grasp. So you've got these few initiatives of trying to teach, and they are also being accused of brainwashing Israeli propaganda. Is there really any hope if that's what we're always going to be told, that Israel's truth is propaganda, is biased?
That's a valid question, but I think that the answer is simple. We simply have no choice. We have to fight back, and in little by little steps to generate that change. I'll tell you something. You're right about high schools, for example. One of the things that we had in mind back then was to trying to address those kids before they go to college, just in this period, in the transition period before they go to college. We have a lot of content and experience in working with this age to provide them, as you accurately say, to provide them with ammunition that will not be over their head. I was in the state, I was asked to speak for BBYO National Retreat Leadership. And the CEO of BBYO was there, and we did a couple of things with the kids, and he was overwhelmed. He said, look, this is really making a change. It's making a shift. It's making people to see things totally different. We are trying, in our humble ways to create this change because this is what we can do. But I think it's important to identify where are the focal places that fuels this toxic environment and to head them and to target them. And now I start to see that, I start to see that. I mean, finally, nations and people, big donors are saying to the universities, forget about our money.
Yes.
Why did it have to take so long to come to this terrible place? I've been saying that for a long time, but again, it's part of this whole PC environment. It's part of this whole, let us stay low, hoping that it will pass us. It's not.
I think that it's finally maybe making some change, like with Wexner Foundation divesting from Harvard is a massive, massive accomplishment. I think that there has not been enough pressure put on some of these funders and the alumni who do make these universities possible without them feeling shamed in some way. But wait a second, what does that mean about me as a human being if I'm going to divest because it's only about Israel? But now what we're seeing with the outright calls for murder right after this horrific pogrom, I think that maybe it's a sad reality that dead Jews perhaps awaken a little bit more empathy than just the whining Jews who claim that it's wrong. Once you have dead Jews, then you have actually legitimate. And once you have people calling out for dead Jews, maybe, okay, it'll open my eyes a little more. So we have now these rallies happening all over America and actually all over the world, even in local communities, which I'm sure you've seen, that they are marching through the streets, massive amounts of flags. Of course, who is funding it, right? We know that it's all prefabricated and it funded easily, and there are posters and there are flags, but nobody's forcing them to raise also Nazi flags. And that presence is still not even eye-opening for many people about the dangers of the unification of the Islamo-fascists of today and the Nazi fascists of yesterday and the neo-Nazis that are just waiting for the green light to be able to unleash their venom as well. They are going to unify. Is it paranoid to believe that they will become more violent in America? Is there some sort of intelligence ammunition we can be giving the diaspora Jews that helps them prepare for such a horrific potential reality?
Look, first of all, we see, unfortunately, the rise of anti-Semitism and expressions of anti-Semitism. We see that everywhere.
And when you see the videos, the number of bystanders doing nothing, I don't know if I should be shocked by it anymore. I'm not really. I'm disgusted by it. I'm not shocked by it.
Look, this is a reality that is unfortunate, but it's a reality, and it's definitely could get worse in the sense that this hatred and this rhetoric is resulting in violence and probably likely to result in more violence. The American jury has to act in different ways to confront that challenge. I think there has to be a very strong lobbying for toughening of laws and registrations and legislation that are holding these people who are involved in such things accountable, seriously accountable for what they're doing. I think there should be a campaign within intellectual circles that basically says, this is red line that we will not tolerate crossing it. This is something that is totally unacceptable. American jury has a lot of power. They have a lot of ability to change, to impact, But I think that the mindset, it starts with the mindset that say, we are now in a battle. It's not only the battle of Israel thousands of miles away from here. We are in a battle here, in many fronts of a battle, and we should be decisively fighting that. And it has to be a multi-winner confrontation. The educational, the political level, the intellectual level, the cultural level, and American jury should stand up.
I think that there's also another level that we have to consider, which is that we do live in a generation where there is the ability for Jewish defense, and we have it in Israel, right? We are blessed with the ability to defend ourselves in land and in the air and with each other in our connection. There's been a big question raised as to whether or not American Jewish communities should be addressing this with self-defense, or if that's a paranoia and an unrealistic one. So like we have started an initiative called Israel Strong, which is about empowering Jews of all ages with the types of self-defense and activism, whether it's through Krav Maga, whether it's through creating Jewish security groups within their communities. We've spoken with some security experts, even since the shooting in Pittsburgh, when a lot of these discussions began. And even until now, you see that hesitation. And I can understand that when you have massacres happening in schools. Mind you, what happened here is bigger than all of the massacres that have taken place in the United States combined within a few hours. That's something that a lot of people kind of forget in the scope of things. All of these gory details are forgotten, that it all happened within a span of these few hours. There's questions of people, should we get a gun? Should we create a safe room? Should we take our mezuzah down? And I'm a big believer in strengthening as a community and creating opportunities and networks for Jewish defense. Who will you call if something happens? How will you band together? If you're not going to have a gun, what kind of defense do you have in place? Do you think that these kinds of preparations are paranoia or panic, or do you think they are things that really American juries should be taking more seriously to empower and give their youth and their young adults and elderly alike the ability to physically defend the Jewish American communities and the communities around the world?
It's always good to be prepared for any kind of an emergency situation. Luckily, American jury has a very well-structured organizations and community life. You got the federations, you got the JCC, you got many of organizations that have the ability, the structure, the staff, the means, the facilities to be able to provide first respond in times of emergencies and following phases afterwards. So it's definitely something that is always good to be prepared. So definitely, but it has to be done in a cold, calm approach, not something that is like get panicked and tomorrow morning.
Right.
It has to be done in a very structured, in a calm approach. We have to differentiate between preparing and building the abilities for response and so on and so on. And at the same time, to stay away from this spiraling or spinning out of control, concerns and panics that basically could easily, I tell you, I mean, you could see that happening here. It's for some people, that already are starting these movies in their heads.
The movies in our head, by the way, are a combination of what we inherited from the stories of the Nazis during the Holocaust, the movies we've now seen. And I know that for myself included, I'm a single mom of 3. So now you've got the videos that aren't just video, they actually have the sounds of the screams, and you hear the children screaming. And the videos and the movies in our heads are real. And we don't want to be paranoid. And we want to be able to say, no, we're not going to let the fear overtake us. And we have to stay calm, knowing that there's this complete unknown of the war that's going to expand. What is your recommendation for people in order to mitigate that fear? How do we find a way to say, I don't have to be afraid anymore? Because I don't think that that's really something anybody can say, that we're not afraid.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're just not right now even capable, many of us, of grasping all the intellectual information. I had somebody say to me the other day, I've gotten some really interesting feedback and discussions with people. One that was saying, the fear is manufactured by our own people. If we just ignore it, we won't be afraid. And I think that that's dangerous. I've had other people say, what are you actually afraid of? They've already committed the murders. Now you're the murderers. And somebody else said to me, who cares about Iran? This is nothing to do with Iran. But I know you're an expert on Middle East affairs in general. So for you, the name Iran is very important. But for other people, they're like, whatever, right? So how do you advise on that?
Look, there are different aspects of that. There is the psychological, emotional. I'm not a psychologist. My recommendations, and I said in my briefings to the communities and talks with people, I have two practical recommendations. One is to educate yourself as much as possible from reliable sources. Try to really educate
Which are hard to know what they are, unfortunately. But
you can find those sources. You could tell that these are reliable sources. You could say that this is something that is intelligent. It provides you some better understanding. And then there is another thing which I strongly recommend. I say to people, look, be enormously careful with the whole story of social media. People are suffocated with gazillions of pieces of information every nanosecond. We are all in this Instagram and Twitter and all those things. And it's very, very difficult. But we have to try to train ourselves to basically try to proactively sift what we receive from those platforms, because the amount of disinformation, misinformation, manipulated information, partial information is just mind-blowing. In every nanosecond, you have gazillions of rubbish that is going over there. And to be very careful with the information that they consume. I gave a long interview to BBC Radio, and it was interesting because she asked me a question. She said, what did you do at the first day of the war? And I said to her, 2 hours into the war, I was starting to run from, one media network into another media network. And I said, but what I didn't do? I almost didn't look at the social media. And she was like, but how can you do that? And I understand. How can you do that? Everything is on the social media. And I said, look, I knew that if I want to be able to provide as much as possible cold analysis and not emotional attached analysis, I have to distance myself from them. I knew exactly what's going to be there.
I think that the common person, though, doesn't feel capable of doing that because that's how they get their news. And also, I think there's a big issue with the fact that people are saying, well, if it comes from a Jewish source, it's not legitimate. We have this incredible resource that was compiled on the history of the Israel-Gaza conflicts. And we were told flat out, well, you have Israel in your name, so therefore you're not legitimate. And I have been, disinvited as an educator on the Holocaust because I'm a Jew, so these are not new things, but there are people who rely primarily on social media or on CNN and Fox News to give them their news. And that's their reputable resource. And it's okay to go check out Al Jazeera, but it's not okay to check, Israel Hayom. So people are really imposing their own personal politics, even into how they're receiving and accessing this information. And so much of it from social media. I think that you had a benefit then to stay away from it. I don't think that most people have that benefit. They don't know where else to look.
That's correct. But again, what I'm saying is basically very simple. Just be enormously cautious and suspicious of information that you are coming across. And particularly, you're right. We had the story of the hospital, which was a great
hospital, right?
Just for a moment, stop and say, okay, this is what they are saying to me. Reality may not necessarily be that. I need to get more information. I need not to jump immediately and to make decisive resolution or conclusion based upon that piece of report or that piece or that segment of this person that is talking there. And it's something that has to be internalized. One of the things that we are doing, which is called critical thinking, because one of the things that was butchered with education was critical thinking. It was butchered.
Also, it's been reapplied, whether it's Noam Chomsky or others who are saying use critical thinking and apply it against Israel, because don't take for granted that Israel is okay. So what I've heard from somebody, for example, is they're saying, you want me to be careful and cautious about what I'm reading in the news if it comes from Hamas, but you're expecting me to just take whatever comes from Israel as a given. And I was explaining, no, that's not what you're expected to do, but you do have to find a point from which you can say this is not an obvious truth. It's not an obvious truth, and I'm going to dissect it further. Listen, nobody reported on the attacks on Barzilai Hospital. So a Hamas hospital is one thing, but an Israeli hospital is another. The double standard at play, I think, is another obstacle to people being and feeling confident in, can I trust that Israel is doing it right? There's just so many questions. Even that CNN reporter, BBC reporter, the way that they're probably asking, and I've seen it happen with others, they're asking questions in a way, it's a leading question to get you to admit something about Israel's fault. And, why is it that Israel's truth is never accepted as truth? And what more can we do if the common person doesn't even feel capable in believing that Israel could be justified in every action and moral in the actions that we're taking?
Yes, definitely. I mean, again, I'm coming from this educational, in my eyes, and my mission is the education, the need to change, the need to make people see it can be done. It's a hard work, but it should be done.
We actually have a project going on to implement policy change for the reporting of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic bias in the educational systems, because one of the problems is that if your teacher says something and it's wrong, and it happened to me back 20 years ago in college, and they said, you know what, either shut up or fail. And
no, that's exactly
the fear is real.
Yeah. Okay, Elena, so look, thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you to Avi for taking the time this morning. I really do appreciate the time, and let's do it again. And what you've shared is so insightful, and I really look forward to being able to spread your message and your talent, expressing it so clearly for people. I look forward to sharing it onward. Really, I appreciate your time this morning, Avi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elena. Bye-bye.
Good luck. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.